All right, so we're having an interview with Chris, and I'll get him to introduce himself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Heckenberg. I come from down south in southern Wiradjuri Country at a place called The Rock. I've lived in Wiradjuri Country most of my life, and I live in a place which is very significant to the local Wiradjuri tribe. My own mob are from the Eora Nation Gadigal people of Sydney, Gadigal Clan, and I found this out through my father's ancestors, and in particular his mother. And she was an Aboriginal girl who came from the south coast to work in service back in the early 20th century for my grandfather. She was only 19, and my grandfather, who she was working for, was a single man, had separated, and they had a child together. So it was something not very sort of publicised or talked about much in those days. But my grandmother had two children. She had my father Kevin and his brother Keith. And unfortunately, tragically, she died from a very commonly treated disease in the early 30s, and of basically an infection to the glands. And she died at 23 years of age. My father was only 4 and his brother was 2. So they were raised by their white father and by family sort of friends who were friends of Edna. They sort of rallied around and done the best job they could raising these two young boys, basically in a white family. And they didn't have, they weren't given any real direct knowledge or information about their mother's Aboriginality. So, her culture, her people was basically just not mentioned, although my father and his brother are obviously Indigenous by their looks and by their features and stuff like that. Certainly my dad was an all-round sportsman, played A-grade rugby for Drummoyne, and he was Sydney born and bred. He was born in Annandale. What I've found out since my dad passed away, that his mother actually, her people were originally from Sydney. She was born in Petersham, which is right in the, I think, sort of almost in the heart of Gadigal Country. And her people were moved out of Sydney down to Bega, I think in the early 20th century, probably even late 19th century. And her descendants are still down there to this day. But they all, not all of them, but I think all of her descendants all hail from Sydney. So they're the original Sydney inhabitants who bore the brunt of colonisation and that first impact of white settlement. And the Gadigal people weren't a particularly large tribe. There was about, I believe, about 90, 150, what the estimates were, but they were either died from European illnesses, or some of them escaped and left or were removed. So that's the history of my father's family, my clan. When I go to Sydney, I feel a real connection to the place. It's funny, I was born and bred in the country, but Sydney has just a real sort of spiritual connection or sort of resonance, particularly around Woolloomooloo, and I remember as a child going to visit relatives, and so I was just awestruck at those caves. Not sure whereabouts they are now, but these niches in the sandstone cliffs and the eons of black soot in the ceilings from thousands of campfires, and I had this sort of real desire to climb up and camp there. There was just something inside. So I love my country, the country I've been brought up in, and have a lot of respect and affinity for is Wiradjuri down around Wagga. I work with the local Indigenous people. My work sort of takes me into the communities. I've always had an affinity without knowing, the real significance of what it was, in my ancestry and in my past, that sort of drew me to love and have a meaningful sort of connection with Aboriginal people.
So what's been the impact for you personally in being able to trace this?
Oh, it's been life-changing. It's been it's very emotional, and the journey so far has been more sort of, I won't say by accident, but it sort of seems like there's a lot of meaning and knowledge and connections that sort of come at the right time at the right place or just totally unexpectedly. So people that I've met and places that I've been to and information I've found out. My mother's been a very big source of the family history, because she knew as my father's, she was white, but she knew all the stories. She had heard all the gossip and all the secret, hushed talk of the aunties that would say, things about my dad, and there's some, and it was, and I'm starting to appreciate, I can't say I fully appreciate, but I understand the stigma and the shame. I remember my father saying that he never really met his mother's uncles and relatives, but he knew they were down at the south coast, and the names of Stevensons, I think there was Kane and Slattery's and stuff like that, but he's not around now to sort of clarify that, but they came knocking on the door once, and they were basically seen at the door and then sent away. And after all these years, I can understand why, because my father lived in Leichhardt, and his mother's uncles turned up to see how her boys were going, and they obviously weren't welcome because of their skin colour, and because they were Aboriginal, and there was such a prejudice and discrimination against Aboriginal people that a lot of people just didn't want to be associated with them, and I see the hypocrisy also of people who had those attitudes but weren't backwards and having liaisons with Aboriginal girls or whatever, and having children to them. So I think they were prepared to have a child from someone of Aboriginal descent. They should have been more accepting and much more supportive and open to all accepting. So
very, very true words. Very true. This website is going to be open to people who are studying law, health, education, etc. Do you have any examples where you've seen or experienced or know of miscommunication, etc., as a result of a cultural difference that you've seen happen in practice?
I think probably from a bystander's point of view, and someone that's observed many instances where people haven't been received as well as maybe someone else because of their colour or their obvious Aboriginality. I've grown up with lots of Aboriginal friends, and I was probably oblivious to their skin colour or anything at all to do with their Aboriginality, because as children you don't often see that. But it was only when I was, say, we're walking into a shop or something, and the shopkeeper would come up and say, look, I'm sorry, but I don't want you in this store, or I'm keeping an eye on you, and I seem to be sort of, immune from all that or beyond, suspicion. But it did surprise me that some of my friends were just, even if they were just scrutinised and followed around, and it really shocked me that the only reason they were doing that was not because they had any history or records, because they were black or of Aboriginal descent. So other things, I remember going out with my friends. I grew up in the country, very sort of country upbringing, and we did all the fishing and shooting and all that sort of stuff. And sometimes when there was a little bit of alcohol consumed, there was a lot of racist taunts, or there was occasions of some really horrible racist taunts and remarks made against my friend because of his black relatives, and it was just disgusting. I thought this has no place in this evening that we've been having, or the argument that sort of occurred. But that was dragged up and thrown, back at this friend of mine, and he was defenceless because it was something, that his family sort of hadn't really publicised. They were Aboriginal descent, and I know his mother and when they were all born and in a tin shack, but it was just never talked about. It was something that I could see that the heartache of being descended or being part of a culture, but not being able to be having any pride or or freedom to to proclaim who you were and who you people who your ancestors were, your relatives were, and the adverse conditions they were brought up in, and the struggle and the battle and the hard workers they were. They had to work doubly hard to be accepted. So it was sort of instances like that that really opened my eyes at this great chasm between white and black Australians.
You said that you're working in an organisation to support Aboriginal people. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, sure. I work actually with problem gamblers, so I'm funded. I work for a non-government organisation funded by the federal government, and I've worked in the community sector and the NGO sector for 20 plus years. But my main profession is I'm a financial counsellor, so I sit down with people who have all these these debts and money problems, and the finances just don't add up, or there's some sort of crisis. They can't afford the rent, or the electricity is going to be disconnected, and so they come and see me. And what I do is I try to sit down and put all the figures down on paper and work out some sort of plan. But in all that process, a lot of stuff comes out, and so I work. Getting back to your original question, I see anyone from any background, any socio-economic group, but my main target is Aboriginal communities, Indigenous people who have gambling-related financial issues or financial difficulties that they're experiencing as a result of either their own problem gambling, and I'll make the distinction, it's when you gamble that you can afford, or somebody else's gambling. And gambling is prevalent in a lot of Aboriginal communities. There's propensity, or there's a whole sort of social, family, lots of reasons why people gamble, and sometimes it's for escape, wanting to win the jackpot or have something that's going to save them from their situation, and people gamble because they want to find a way out. They don't have the money, and so I help them on a practical level with their debts and the trouble they might be in. But the underlying thing I'm always looking at is how I can help them to address the true issue, which is their behaviour. So it's their gambling, behaviour, and their the things that are motivating or causing them to gamble. So I work in conjunction with problem gamblers and send them off, and they do therapeutic, one-on-one counselling. So I love my job. I travel over southern New South Wales, and I go to all places, neighbourhood centres, all sorts of little way out communities, and network, and I'm largely accepted within those little communities, and people word of mouth. And I know in Aboriginal communities, it's not your poster or the advertisement or whatever. It's word of mouth recommendation. So that's trust. Someone said to me the most precious thing I think a person ever said to me was an Aboriginal person said to me, the reason people come and see you, Chris, is that you're trusted. So I think that's just such an honour and such an affirmation, that what I'm doing is making a bit of a change in people's lives.
So if you were giving a message to people who are coming out to work with Aboriginal people or in Aboriginal communities, what would be the message that you would give them?
Good question. That's a very interesting and very subtle. The answer to that isn't textbook. It's from I think just walking the talk. Not just talking the talk, but it's building trust, being consistent and low key, not coming in with a lot of sort of grandiose sort of white bands, all the bells and whistles. Aboriginal people are very down to earth. They sort of see through all that sort of stuff. So it's just introducing yourself, maybe getting to know someone in the community and getting them to introduce you to other people who, then you come that endorsement and the recommendation. Just turning up, just being not just, just calling in for a yarn, a cuppa, even without any business. So you don't have to have an outcome there and then. It can be just, how you going? Just thought I'd call in. What's been happening? I'll be through again in the next few weeks. And just a bit of a yarn. It could be about anything really. The footy, that's a good topic to be sort of brush up on. The other thing is obviously all those things about being respectful that people. Some people want to go at their own pace. They might want to get so far, and you have to know the cues and the signs when to just leave something go, or perhaps just leave it for another time. So you might walk away and think, oh, gee, I didn't get much here today, but you probably did. You probably achieved a whole lot more than you really sort of appreciate. But I think the most important thing is just the low-key approach, being accessible, being consistent, or just not just turning up when there's business to be had, and being respectful their time. Maybe if don't be too you can't you don't watch your clock too much. It's just it's on their time and their terms, and the family business comes up, and maybe saying, look, I'll come back tomorrow afternoon, or what are you doing? Whatever it is. So I think it's just being very low key and just not being too prescriptive and chuck the rule book out the window. It doesn't work.
Very good point. It doesn't work. Are there any other examples that you want to give us of incidences that you think are relevant or pertinent that might be a teaching point for somebody?
Yeah, I think everyone should do some cultural awareness training. I think everyone should sit down with an Aboriginal person or a group, or attend a seminar, and something not just as a loud workshop and, okay, there you go, you got your certificate of attainment, you now know how to deal with Aboriginal people. But it's doing the ones I recommend. There are a few good ones, and I think they go for a day or two or 3 days, and you cover all aspects of invasion from Aboriginal Native people's point of view, what it was like to be, to have the original boat people arrive on your doorstep and not be able to make them go away. Understand the complete and utter decimation, particularly the Sydney and the eastern coast Aboriginal people, what they suffered. Knowing that the struggle, I think a lot of people blame Aboriginal people for the predicament they're in. There's so many value judgments and judgment statements, and all these things. If they hadn't done this, or if they did this, or if they only done that. But when there's been suffered so much family disintegration, children were taken away, families were separated. When you weren't given the opportunities, you were denied a job, even a place to live. You were told, you were arrested. You weren't even allowed into parts of town. You weren't even allowed into town unless you had a certificate. Then you can start to understand the trauma and the hurt that Aboriginal people have suffered all these years, and they're still trying to come to terms with and reconcile and wanting to be healed of. So my suggestion is go and learn about Aboriginal culture, the impact of settlement and invasion, and read the stories, listen to people's first-hand accounts. There's ones that lived in missions and in the slums around Sydney and stuff like that, and I'll tell you what they were up against and why it's just not so easy just to get off their arse and get a job or whatever, because they've got a lot to deal with, but they have a very bright future to look forward to, and that's what I think we need to also remember, that our people are moving forward and are making an impact on the world now that it's never been imagined. I think do it for those people who came before us that aren't around, like my grandmother, for instance, who was only 23, and my dad, who was never given permission to be an Aboriginal.
That's really important, because what you're talking about there is that intergenerational impact. It's not just that's happened to one Aboriginal person, it's that it's happened to multiple generations, and you're still getting the impact today. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. So you've told me a range of things that have happened in your family that's intergenerational. Can you talk about how it's impacted on you and your identity?
Right. Well, it's made me, for a long time, it's made me think I was just white through and through. But I realise now, actually, learning about my culture and my ancestry, and I've always had the feeling on the inside that I'm actually more like a wedding cake. So anyone looks at me and says, oh, you're white. No, I'm a wedding cake. You cut through the white icing and I'm brown on the inside. White on the outside, brown on the inside.
So you're feeling really, your identity is really strong, and even though you've had this multiple generational effect of trying to assimilate your family and get rid of that Aboriginality.
You can't change the colour on the inside of someone or their spiritual identity or what's in their soul or what they feel. They can't. Something that's really hard to describe. But it's being Aboriginal. I know for the textbook, definition was the colour of someone's skin, but because of the connection to land, the spiritual side of it, like this deep connection with kin, with country, with culture, skin colour has nothing to do with it. It's the colour or what's on the inside that I can feel. I wish I was black and, can say I'm an Aboriginal man of the Gadigal tribe, the Eora Nation, but I'm that on the inside, and no one's going to tell me I'm not.